Welcome back, friends. And as you can see, I'm in a new digs. I'm here in the museum at Schembechler Hall, joined by my partner, Brian Bush. But before we get to him, I want to let you know what's going on in MGO Blue podcast. Thursday, it's the return of Conquering Heroes, and we're going to have head coach of the softball team, Bonnie Thole. I know that they're up and running. It's going to be great, and I can't wait to talk to her. Friday, defend the block after a big-time men's basketball game, and that one I have full knowledge and awareness of. That is Michigan going down to West Lafayette. That's where my daughter's at. She's a freshman down there to take on Purdue at Mackey Arena. So there might be a little bit of a friendly family wager on that one, but nothing too big. Just bragging rights more than anything, but I'm excited about that. And Brian, before we get to the 7 from 77, I want to bring you in here. So if you listen to that game on the radio or the Varsity Network app, you're going to hear the voice of Michigan basketball. That's Brian Bush along with Terry Mills. And it's been an emotional roller coaster watching this basketball team. Where are they at? What have you seen?
Yeah, last week, if you happen to make those your first two games you've really gone in on and consumed, you would think that you might need to get a heart check because those were stressful. Those were nail-biting. The Northwestern game from the under 4 media timeout, so the last built-in break of regulation to the end of overtime, It was 46 minutes of real time. So that was quite an experience, but Michigan got it done after bouncing back. My question to you is it Michigan football and Purdue basketball for your daughter? Is that how she's positioning this, or is she all in one way or the other?
She's all in Purdue. As much as you could be in on their football team, and I know they get a new coach, all that stuff, but yeah, she's all in on Purdue football, basketball, all sports. So this will be a nice little rivalry, and we'll see what happens. Hopefully Michigan, if they can get a lead in this one, they could keep a lead and come away with a big win. This would be one of those quad 1 win.
Yeah, this would be a quad 1A type of a win. It would be huge for Michigan. It's one of their 3 double plays where they will face Purdue later in the year. Must have been because there's a Jansen now in West Lafayette. That must have been how it was positioned. Yeah. But all right, let's get into our 7 from 77. And John, you know the phrase "eat the frog," right?
I actually had to Google that.
Did you?
Yes, I have not heard of "eat the frog" before, but as I understand it, we take on all the tough work early in the show so that we can enjoy things later in the show.
So we do that by reacting to the national championship game. First, the football itself, John. Your takeaways from Ohio State's win over Notre Dame.
You know what? I disinterested at halftime, as I think a lot of people were. The game started to get away from Notre Dame, but if there's anything we learned about college football, especially Notre Dame, when we saw the Penn State game, kind of felt the same way. And then in the second half, they came storming back, actually won that one, which is how we got this set up between Notre Dame and Ohio State. So I did stay tuned in, and it was a nice effort, great comeback. And I'm just curious as to, Brian, would you have gone for a first down, touchdown versus the field goal at the end of the game versus what Marcus Freeman did?
Yes, we'll talk about it a little bit later from a local standpoint in Southeast Michigan with the Lions. But when you are down and you have a chance to score, I understand the allure of trying to get some more points, keep the momentum, but time is a factor. And I think you're seeing now the revolution start of fourth down, go for it scenarios where, yeah, it's risk, no doubt. But there's a lot of instances where the team that's aggressive tends to be benefited because, hey, trust your process, trust your offense, trust your team. And I would have gone for it there. I know it wasn't an ideal circumstance, but you're playing from behind. You're trying to keep momentum on your side after trying to make a rally. Yeah, I think you go for it.
Well, and it's also with the threat and the weapons that Ohio State has. I mean, that is it. You just, when you've had a hard time stopping, I know it was better in the second half, but when you've had a hard time stopping that Ohio State offense, just because you get 3 points doesn't mean you're going to get a stop and get the ball back and do something special at that point. So I'm with you. I would have gone for the points at that point. But here's the other thing. And maybe it's just because it's happened in big moments. If you told a kicker, I want you to aim for the upright, I guarantee you they couldn't hit it. And now all of a sudden, how many epic moments have we seen, whether it's in the NFL or in college football, where a kicker ends up hitting one of the uprights? It's uncanny to me how often it happens.
Yeah. There was a bet on, I think, DraftKings before the Super Bowl last year of will a field goal hit the upright? And it's like, why are we doing this? But hey, that's why they got the big buildings in Las Vegas and now the big digital buildings at DraftKings and FanDuel and all that. All right, number 2 on our 7 from 77. We discussed this last week on the podcast, and you said, hey, I can't root for either team. So how did you take in the game? Because for me, there was a point where I started to lean into one team, and I did not go into it going into the game. Did you have any change to how you were taking in the contest as it was happening?
Well, I was leading up to the game. So many people, if you don't have a dog in the fight, you'll simply pick the underdog. The underdog was Notre Dame. If you're a Michigan fan and you find it repulsive to say anything nice about Ohio State, you're pulling for Notre Dame. And I talked about CJ Carr. He's on that team. He obviously didn't see the field, but there were so many things that led me to, and some friends that I have, and I have friends that are Buckeyes. Keep your enemies close. And I going into the game, I wanted Notre Dame to win that game. And maybe it was the underdog status. I don't know what it was, but then as the game went on, I wanted even more for Notre Dame to make that epic comeback, much like we saw the game against Georgia and Ohio State a few years ago, where we talk about going off the upright or missing a field goal. I was kind of hoping that the hopes and dreams of one Ryan Day and Jack Sawyer and that whole team would get crushed. It just wasn't to be.
That was it for me. Once Notre Dame scored the first 8-point possession, that was for me when I said, man, if they can pull this off. It's one of those things where had Notre Dame pulled that off, people would have talked more about the Ohio State loss nationally than the Notre Dame win. Isn't that what, as a Michigan fan, you're looking for? Hey, how can we highlight the loss more than the win? Because unfortunately, you can't tie. It would have been cool to go with the penalty kick-esque 2-point conversions. Not in any other game. I don't want that. But in an Ohio State Notre Dame national championship, I think that would have been a good time to try to show how ridiculous that concept is.
Yeah.
That was what turned for me. And give Notre Dame credit for getting back into it. Give Ohio State credit for sealing the deal with, hey, novel concept. Go to Jeremiah Smith.
Yes. Yeah, it does. It is a novel concept. It shouldn't be for the Buckeyes. And here's just another turn as well. And I think, Brian, you'll probably agree with me on this one. I was running around, dropping kids off, picking kids up, running errands during the first half. And so I got back just a little bit before halftime. But in doing it, I was listening to the Varsity Network app, and I was listening to the Ohio State broadcast. Paul Keels, Jim Lachey. You can't make two better guys. I know it's hard to say that about a couple of Buckeyes. I know exactly what they bleed, but they've been very kind to me. And I know that there's a great working relationship that we have, and I call them friends as well. And so I text them this morning just to tell them congratulations. They had a great call, great broadcast. I know how much fun it is to win a national championship. We're not that far removed from it, so it that almost swayed me a little bit, but not enough.
You could always find something. This was just one you really had to dig, but you said it perfectly. Paul and Jim are great. Skip Mossick runs that broadcast. He's as good as they come as well. So yeah, we certainly wish them the best, but not anymore. All right, number 3 on our 7 from 77. Here's what I really want to dig into. This has fascinating ramifications for this rivalry. Where does it go from here? Does this Ohio State run after Michigan won in Columbus like the Wolverines did? Does it add fuel to the rivalry's fire? Does it negatively impact the regular season edition of the game? I understand probably the two fan bases are on two ends of the spectrum, but we don't know. We can't fast forward to November of 2025 as much as I know you'd like to.
Yeah.
How does this affect the game?
I think it ramps it up even more. And we all know that there's lunatics. That's what we call them, fanatics, right? Fanatics, lunatics, whatever you want to call them, on both sides. It seems to be that there's a heavy dose of them down in Columbus. And I think there are still going to be people that are not happy with Ryan Day, even though he won a national title, but he's lost to Michigan 4 years in a row. And I think that adds to the rivalry, to that, to everything that the fans are going to be talking about. I mean, you see it now, and there was, even this past week, in somewhere in the state of Michigan, I got sent the screenshot, and it is, how many days it's been since Ohio State has beaten Michigan, and, all of these different things. And so it may not hold the same clout in regards to who ultimately wins the Big Ten. And I think more years than not, it will have some of those ramifications. Who goes to Indianapolis? Do either team go? Does neither team go? Which was the case this year. But it also have some ramifications for the college football playoff. So I don't see it. And it's the game. It's the best rivalry in all of sports. It's not going anywhere. Nothing is diminishing it. It's still going to be the last Saturday of the college football season. It's rivalry weekend for a reason. And just look at the TV ratings. They continue to skyrocket. So maybe not as much as it was the last 3 years, but it's still always one of, if not the most highest rated college football game of the year. People want to see it. People enjoy the discourse between the two programs. And I think the way that this game ended this year in the game is only going to add to it.
I like the way commenter Corey puts it. Congratulations to the Ohio players and real fans that see both sides, but we still own y'all. LOL. That's about right. Not much you can say from a Michigan standpoint over the last, 5 weeks. It's a tremendous run. You tip your cap. But if you'd like to, whenever you listen to this, how many days since OSU has beaten Michigan.com is where you can go if you would like to find out.
And here's the other thing that we'd like to hold over their heads is, they owe us a big thank you. You're welcome, Ohio State and all of the Buckeyes, that we were able to get you right, get you focused, and get you to a point where you could actually win a national championship. It's you can't get over top of us, but the rest of the country, well done.
I think you can say that both sides too, right? I mean, what Michigan had to do in order to get back into national contention, Michigan had to overcome Ohio State. They started in 2021, and they've continued it. And we talked about it for years during the Ohio State dominance. It takes a moment in time to change history, and then history is significantly altered when you look back at this rivalry. So the fact that Michigan was able to win that game in Columbus, even if Ohio State won the national championship, which they did, it keeps the rivalry here, and it makes for a really fascinating thing. And I want to kind of get into that as we do. We'll talk plenty between now and November of 2025 about how the 2024 season impacts the 2025 game. And for Ohio State, they're going to go into 25 similarly to how Michigan went into 2024. A ton of great players gone. Now, there are still some stars. We mentioned Jeremiah Smith. He is the star of stars in Ohio State, and they always seem to have receivers. Their receiving core will continue to be great. My question is, coming to Ann Arbor, 2025, Ryan Day, many members of his staff will know the pain of this. Not a lot of players will have the same type of role in that version of the game that they've had at any point. So it really adds unique pressure to that matchup from Ohio State's standpoint and from Michigan's, because Ohio State has now something that you can kind of put up there. Yeah, we won the national championship. 2025 in Ann Arbor feels like a pivot point in the rivalry.
It does. And I mean, we could say that every year, especially if you have a team that's won 3 or more in a row. What is this going to be a pivot point where, it's, hey, year 4, when Ohio State was favored by, basically 3 touchdowns, yet they still couldn't find a way to beat Michigan. Now, where Ohio State is, and they're going to be just fine in regards to the transfer portal, talent that they have on the roster, quarterbacks. I mean, I know Will Howard won't be there. There's, Emeka Egbuka won't be there, but they're still going to have plenty of talent. And it's really going to come down to, can Michigan get up to the level that they need to be to not only compete with Ohio State, because it's physical as much as it is mental, But are they going to be, is Michigan going to be able to get to the point where they can physically compete, where they've got the speed, they've got the talent? Will, whoever is that quarterback, it's going to be somebody that's, inexperienced in Ann Arbor. And so will they be good enough at that time, having learned enough throughout the course of the season with enough wins to make that game even more dramatic? And I think it could be a very pivotal year in the rivalry if Michigan does get back to being a national contender this year, and Ohio State remains there, which more likely they are. I mean, they've kind of always been that program that, they just reload versus trying to regroup. So, is it going to be a year in Ann Arbor that will determine the fate of the coming years for this rivalry? We'll see. Michigan's got a lot of work to do. There's no question about it. And I know there's a lot of things going on in college football, not going to affect this year. I know there's a proposal to change the transfer portal window, possibly changing the college football schedule, which is not going to happen to do anything to affect next year. But I think there's a lot of moving parts, and to think that, this game in 2025, the build up for it. And here's the other thing. There's nobody on that roster that knows what it's like to beat Michigan. There's nobody that's come to Ann Arbor, and I know early on in Ryan Day's tenure, he's got to win, but there's nobody else on that roster. There's very few coaches that know what it's like or what it takes to beat a Michigan football team.
As we record on a blustery Tuesday morning, getting ready for November 29th, 312 days away.
I just want August to get here. Let's start the season. Let's have that build up to the end of November. And yeah, I'd like to fast forward to that point, but I don't want to miss anything that this college football season coming up has to offer. I just don't want the offseason.
Well, one more ramification conversation, and that's for the Big Ten. Back-to-back national championships now. How does that impact the Big Ten standing in college football? And most importantly, in relation to the SEC, because when the SEC was dominant, not only were they winning a lot, but they were winning with different programs.
It's going to be really interesting. Back-to-back Big Ten wins. And I think we've all seen, and it's been talked about in a lot of different circles, not just here in the Big Ten country, but, NIL and the transfer portal and the ability to reshape teams from year to year. That's what Michigan is going through right now. We saw it with Indiana. We've seen it at different programs. And is there now a much more level playing field? And I think here's something interesting that I've been talking to some of my buddies about is, there's always been a lot of money in the Big Ten, whether it's, and you're talking about universities with big financial backing. We saw what it meant for Michigan in recruiting and NIL this year. We know what it meant for Ohio State last year in NIL. Will the Alabamas, the Georgias, all these other programs, will they have donors? Will they have alumni that want to step up on a yearly basis and provide the funds that it's going to take to stay competitive at an elite level and not just a one-off? And because this isn't a one-off for Ohio State. We've known and we've talked about their level of talent for a number of years, and for Michigan as well. That's going to be the challenge for a lot of programs. And now that NIL and the transfer portal have leveled the playing field in so many different areas, is the dominance of the SEC and the programs in the SEC, is that over? And I don't necessarily know that I want to say 2 years makes a trend, but it sure does. It's a good start.
It's funny. I talked about a Defend the Block episode. 1 time is an occurrence. 2 times can be a coincidence. Not always, but it can be. And 3 is definitely a trend. And 1 more, we'll see. Now, I want to dig into that as we get into number 6. I made a list, I know you did too, of the teams in the Big Ten and the SEC. I don't want to get into forever, right? Because a lot of things can change. But over the next 10 years, so 25 through 34, who in each league in your mind can win a national championship? Because to me, I would certainly take under a half of any other non-Notre Dame teams outside of Big Ten and SEC country. I think Notre Dame could win a national championship in the next 10 years. They got to the title game this year. Marcus Freeman's a heck of a coach. So take out him. I would take out them. I'd be surprised if anyone else outside of the Big Ten or the SEC won one of the next 10 years. Who in your mind? Start with the Big Ten. I broke it down this way, where I said definitely, and then I have a bubble of where I could go either way.
Okay, well, you're adding a whole nother layer there.
I am.
In
No,
terms
just
of
how about this? How about this? Give me your list. Give me your list, and then tell me what your toughest one or two was to say yes to.
Okay, well, I think it's a small list. And I'm going to go off this because I misplaced my actual written down list. In the Big Ten, I believe it's Oregon, it's Penn State, it's Ohio State, and it's Michigan. I really don't see another program in the Big Ten that is in the next decade. Not that they can't, or not that there won't be a one-off, but I wouldn't predict anybody other than those four programs. And I know you could talk about Iowa and Kirk Ferentz. I think there's going to be a change in power there at some point. And do they modify, or, do they bring into the 20th century their offense? Do they find a quarterback? And I don't know the answer to that question. Wisconsin with Luke Fickell right now, they've really been, struggling to get going. Illinois with Brett Bielema, I just don't see that they're ever going to be able to get to that level. And even Indiana, I know that this year is this that one-off year? Are they is Kirk Cignetti able to continue to mine the transfer portal and get those guys to gel like he did this year? A lot of that gelling came from players that he coached at JMU. And so when everything is new, everybody is new, I'm just not sure. I wouldn't rest on saying, yeah, that's predictable, that you could be successful with that. So I really think it's only four programs in the Big Ten that I see winning national titles in the next 4 years.
So I have one extra. I have those four. I have USC. They have a proven coach. They have a proven brand. In the next 3 to 5 years, I would not put them on this list, but I do here. The one that I put on the bubble that was tough for me, and this is partly a nod to what happened last year, I put Washington, and here's why. It's going to be tough for Washington, and let's face it, if the Phil Knight money dries up at Oregon, it's going to be tough for both those programs because they're getting partial shares. When USC and UCLA joined the league, those were full shares of the TV money. Right now, Oregon and Washington came in for partials through, I think, 30, maybe 31. I like Jed Fish. Seattle's a big market. They got there last year. Again, I'd probably lean no, but I think Washington has enough to where I wanted to at least include them in the conversation. But they are certainly sixth on that list for me. The big five for me are the four you mentioned in USC.
Yeah, and I'm just not sure. I'm not sold on Lincoln Riley being able to have success. And here's the thing about USC. Let's just play this out, because if USC has another year like they did this year in the Big Ten, do you think Lincoln Riley's even there? And because I understand he's a proven commodity. He was proven at Oklahoma, and since coming to USC with Caleb Williams, who he brought from Oklahoma, yeah, there was some success. Ultimately, not the success that they're looking for. And if they make a change, I think there's going to be a hard reset out there, and it's going to take some time to build up. And I just don't know that they are ready. Maybe in years 7, 8, 9 of the next decade that we're talking about, because they, unlike Oregon, and kind of even unlike Washington, that those programs are built on being physical, and having some good big offensive linemen. To win in the Big Ten, you're going to have that. And USC certainly wasn't ready for that this year. And it's going to take some time to develop that.
Yeah, it's more of a bet. And I kind of went through the process of, I think for most of these schools we're talking about with the Big Ten, and also, we'll get to the SEC here momentarily. We never can truly see when head coach changes are going to come, but am I really going to stake definitely that I feel that Penn State with James Franklin's leading the way has a better chance than Lincoln Riley and USC to win the national championship over the next 10 years? I just couldn't get there.
Well, trust me, when I put Penn State on there, sometimes you can win in spite of your coach. And I think next year of the next decade, next year might be the best chance Penn State has to do it, with a lot of that talent coming back. They're going to be losing some, there's no question, especially on defense. You get your quarterback back, and I know part of the decision for him to go back is that he just felt he wasn't ready for the NFL, which is a very headsy decision, and can be humbling as well. And in that, you get focused on what do I need to do to get to that next level. And if he's able to accomplish that, I think along the way, they're going to win a lot of games in Happy Valley.
Yeah, it's a great point. SEC, give me your list.
SEC is a little bit weirder.
There's a few bubble teams for me that were tough.
Yeah, there's a lot of bubble teams, but I think in the next decade, if we're talking about teams that can, that I think could win, how did you phrase it? Because words matter in this. That will win, or
no. That have the capabilities.
Okay.
I mean, listen, we're not. I have more than 10 total on this in terms of Big Ten. I mean, I put 5.5 basically for the Big Ten, and I have 5 that I definitely believe can. I have 3 bubble teams in the SEC.
Okay, so it's interesting because I had 4 in the Big Ten, and I think I remember I put down 5 in the SEC. So let's start at the top, and you got some teams that were in the playoffs this year. Texas being one of them. Tennessee, I think, is a team, and I know some people might put them in the bubble, but I think that they are a team that's going to spend enough and commit enough resources to be competitive. Georgia, Alabama. I can't imagine them not being in the college football playoffs too many years. And then my other one was LSU. And I think, again, I think it's a money thing. If LSU and Brian Kelly, I don't know that they win it with Brian Kelly, but I think that there is enough juice behind the brand, behind the fan base, that they're at some point going to say enough is enough, and they're just going to, for 1 or 2 years, dump as much money. And that's really what it comes down to. Who's willing to spend the most amount of money is going to have higher odds to be competitive in today's college football. And this is without any rule changes, without any modifications. Don't even know how revenue share is going to play into this because nobody knows what that looks like anymore anyway. But those are the 5 teams, 5 programs that I think in the next decade could win a national title out of the SEC.
So we're pretty locked in here. My one tweak, I do have Tennessee on my bubble. The other team I put in there, you got into it with how crazy college football is right now, with how much we don't know about where it's going to go from a monetary standpoint. I put Texas A&M as a team that I definitely do believe can. They're probably the only team on the list from either league that I also think can go 3-9, 4-8 if everything implodes. But they feel like they have the best ability in this NIL era and soon the revenue sharing era to make up for mistakes quicker, to where if we're sitting here in 2035, where AI robots will be there'll be an AI Jon and an AI Brian. They'll be great. They'll be super smart, no mistakes. It'll be awesome.
Not quite as witty.
Yes. Well, we'll see. Listen. Yeah. I don't want to speak ill of our AI overlords here down the road, but that's the one team that I could see very much being like, oh yeah, in 2027 they went 4-8, and in 2033 they went 16-0.
Yeah, I mean, they were a team that was just on the outside looking in for me, and I think you're right. I mean, they're a team that's going to spend some money at some point. They may say enough is enough. We saw it with Jimbo Fisher. They were willing to spend the money to get rid of him, and I think here's the thing about the SEC. We always talk right now in college football about NIL dollars. It's going to be about revenue share, and I think revenue share is going to be very interesting because the Big Ten and the Big Ten schools, they offer more varsity sports. So not that I don't know that they're necessarily going to be spending less on football, but resources will be much thinner across college sports. And when you offer 27 sports, and it depends on how they're going to, I know that the attorneys and the lawmakers all talked about Title IX and how it plays a part of the distribution of the revenue share. It'll be interesting to see how that plays a part of in the SEC. You have some teams that only have 17 varsity sports or 18 or 19. And in the Big Ten, as I mentioned, you've got 27, 28, 29. There's some teams that have over 30 varsity sports, men's and women's varsity sports. How does that play into just the division of the pie of the revenue share money? And then it's about where are the outside sources of income going to be coming from?
The two other bubbles, along with Tennessee, I had. Curious if you considered Oklahoma or Florida. More long-term plays, obviously.
I could see both of them being in the bubble. How long does Oklahoma go with? Okay, they beat Alabama handily this year, yet under Brett Venables, they haven't been, ranked high in recruiting, player development, transfer portal. They haven't really knocked it out of the park. How long do they go? Because it's a very storied program. I understand. I think they would be closer to a bubble team to me than Florida would be.
Agreed. I went Oklahoma, Tennessee, Florida. Florida was my, what do you want to call it? They're going to Dayton. They're the last team in. I just remember literally 5 years ago, lists were made and people said Michigan did not have the ability to win a national championship. So I don't want to discard these brands, these big time programs that are, Michigan was a sleeping giant until it was awakened. Florida and Oklahoma have done it in the past. They've done it in recent memory. And Oklahoma's, to me, they might be the most fascinating team and program here over the next little while, because I always wondered their fit in the SEC and if it was a sustainable model. They were so good at dominating the Big 12, more so than Texas. I felt like Texas was a little more mobile. Oklahoma was that Big 12. And it was, to me, such a huge risk. And it could pay off, or we could be sitting here going, hey, remember when Oklahoma was good? How about that?
Well, and here's the other thing. Think about Nebraska. Remember when Nebraska was good? And so there's another factor that plays into this as well. If you get stuck with a coach that's a bad fit, but you've just paid him a big contract, again, athletic departments right now, they're, you could debate whether you believe it or not, but they're going to be strapped in the first initial years for trying to figure out how to make up the difference in revenue, in regards to revenue share versus what's coming in. And I do believe a lot of the Big Ten schools and programs are built to be able to make up the difference and figure that out. But there are also going to be a lot of schools like Florida who decides to keep their coach, and maybe it pays off because you got continuity, you got recruiting, you got some of those things, and they didn't have a bad year. But if you get stuck with the coach that you're not happy with, you might be stuck with him and the inability to buy him out until the years finally run out, or enough years run out. And then do you set your program back so far that the next coach, it's going to take them even longer to get the program back to where it historically was, like in Oklahoma?
Yeah, it's fascinating. All right, number 7. Boy, college football season officially over. Last night is always a bittersweet night. Obviously much sweeter, January 8th of 2024 versus January 20th of 2025 from a Michigan standpoint. But college football season's over, John. How do you cope? Are you doing okay?
I will make it. I'll be just fine. It won't be an enjoyable journey, but there's enough landmarks along the way between the NFL and college football. And there's a lot that's got to be decided this offseason. When I say offseason, it could be midseason for a lot of these college sports in regards to what is the House settlement going to look like? What does it mean for college football? And next year, looking ahead to next year, what does having 2 less home games mean for Michigan financially? And what does that look like moving forward? And we're all excited to go to Norman, Oklahoma. I know I am. I have never been there, and I'm excited to play a football game there, or at least watch a football game there. But that's really, I think there's so much anticipation of what is to come in college football that this is not going to be a dull offseason. There's going to be a lot of things happening. I don't think they make any modifications to the college football playoffs. But before we do move on, Brian, I do want to ask you this in the light of, in some of the conversation that we've had so far. We've talked about the 12-team college football playoff, the seeding, the buys, the automatic bids, all of those different things. In the end, do you think the 2 best teams squared off in the national championship game? Did they get it right eventually? I mean, did the process get it right? And did ultimately the best team in college football end up the national champion?
So unquestionably, the most accomplished regular season team did not play. That was Oregon. But because Ohio State lost at Oregon by 1 and then pummeled Oregon in the Rose Bowl. And hey, you know what? I don't hate the idea that I don't want to call it a gimme, but Notre Dame had to run the table after the loss to Northern Illinois, soon to be Mountain West program, Northern Illinois football. They had to run the table to get there. And I'll say yes, because the number 2 seed, Georgia, almost lost to Georgia Tech and lost multiple times.
Yeah.
And because Ohio State so emphatically avenged one of their 2 losses. They did not avenge their second.
Yeah, they couldn't. Well, we didn't make it. They weren't offered that opportunity.
John, the why is not important here. Don't worry about it. Just say it. I have enjoyed the social media commentary about the shirts that show every game result for Ohio State's national championship. That is pretty enjoyable.
It is. And it will be so. I mean, hey, not a lot to hang our hat on in this past year of college football for Michigan fans. But that win over Ohio State, it is something that will live on forever. But to answer my own question, I do think they got it right. I think, the one-off, and I mentioned this when we went to 12 teams. And with Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA being in the Big Ten, Texas, Oklahoma being in the SEC, the expansion of the conferences, I don't know that we're ever going to see another undefeated team in college football as a national champion. It's a gauntlet to run through every season, and I think we're going to have to get used to, just like we don't see it in the NFL. I don't know that you're going to see it in college football anymore, and you are going to have teams like an Oregon that was the best team coming into the playoffs that loses a game, maybe not the way that Oregon did in the playoffs, but it's just an unbelievable gauntlet to run through the college football season. And I say that in the mindset of, look what happened to Notre Dame. I think we have to accept that the fact that there are going to be really good wins on some team schedules, and there's going to be really bad losses as well. And it's really up to the college football playoff committee to get what they believe is as close as they can to the 12 teams that belong in the playoffs. And then, it'll sort itself out. And I do think the 2 best teams at the end of the year ended up playing in the national title game.
All right, that's our 7 from 77. We'll do some Michigan-specific talk, and we start that by welcoming those on the live stream if they'd like to ask questions, like our buddy, let's see, I just missed it. There it is. Otis, was there a game last night?
Yeah. No, it's for those that live in Southeast Michigan. Football died this weekend. And there's a lot of people that, after watching that Lions game on Saturday night, trying to get over the emotions of that, and then not having a horse in the race. And even if you were somewhat interested in what happened in college football, it was 2 programs that you really don't like. And so it was hard to even consider that there was college football. And I'll ask you this as well. I know we got other questions to talk to, but this is a nice conversation we have going. In terms of the schedule for college football, I think there's a lot of people that, if this game was played 2 weeks ago and you had a smaller window to play, and I'm not saying take away any games in the college football playoffs, keep it at 12 teams, but if this game was played 2 weeks ago, would there have been more interest in last night's game?
Honestly, it is tough for me to gauge because of the unique matchup. What I will say is this: I wish college football would go to the champions format for the conference championships and have a 9th conference game be, hey, 1 versus 2 in your league, then 3 versus 4. Everybody gets 9 games. Because to me, where I think the biggest questions have to be said for college football's whole schedule is, how valuable are the conference championship games in the grand scheme of things? How does Oregon feel about winning the Big Ten right now, right? And that was something that was preserved way back when. Obviously, what Michigan did last year, winning the Big Ten and then winning the national championship, that's the ultimate, of course. But I think it was SMU's coach, Rhett Lashley, who said we could just say we have COVID and not play the ACC championship game, and we'd probably be in the college football playoff. Now, they still got in We discussed this for more than a month now. To me, the committee, based on the format that it had, got it right. They got the right 12 teams in. They ranked them properly. Bracket seating, alignment, all of that, that's to be discussed. It will be. It might change next year. I just don't know how you try to rectify what is now. I mean, Oregon played Penn State in the Big Ten championship. Neither team reached the national championship. No SEC team made it, and it was Georgia and Texas. It's something that needs to be considered, and I think that would allow you to move the schedule up and maybe solve some of those issues.
It just feels like this game is so far removed from the bulk of fan bases, and I know Ohio State's a national brand, Notre Dame's a national brand, but it's not the NFL, and it's more regional than the NFL. And if you're going to play this game, I mean, there's a lot of college fan bases, and maybe they don't have great, traditions, but a lot of college football fans where their season was done at the beginning of December, and even if they played in bowl games, it would have been done, sometime around Christmas or the New Year. And we're now looking at January. What is it? January 20, January 19 that this game was played. I just feel it's too far removed. And I do want to address one comment. This one comes from Don M. OSU was 8 going in and Notre Dame was 6. It seems like the selection committee was off a bit. And I will say this, and this is where I don't like the automatic seeding. If you win one of the Power Fours, or if you're the highest rated, non-Power 4 team, you get a bye. And so you're automatically ranked 1 through 4. Ohio State did not win the Big Ten, so the best they could have been ranked was 5. Notre Dame has no chance of being 1 through 4, and they went in at 6. So
they were 7.
Okay, 7. Yeah. So Don M, you're wrong. Just kidding. Just
take it. Don, come
on. Yeah. But it's, that's where I don't like the auto seeding in regards to you win a conference. And I understand, hey, you win a conference, maybe it's just an automatic bid to the college football playoffs, so you automatically get a seat at the table. But I don't like the fact that Boise State had a bye week. I just don't. I don't think that they deserved being 1 through 4.
Hey, Don had another comment here. He's keeping Michigan-Ohio State rivalry feisty. Right? Not happy that OSU gained 6 whole games on Michigan in the all-time win list. Darn right. We're coming back next year.
Yes. Still have the most.
I got you, Don. So from a Michigan standpoint, yeah, that's all fair. Totally understand that. And Notre Dame, hey, to Notre Dame's credit in this case, they should not get in a scenario where everyone else has to play a conference championship game or is eligible for one. Notre Dame should have had to have won an extra game. That's the one risk. You literally might have a scenario where Notre Dame, if they get back to a national championship game, if you take the shackles of buys for only conference champions, Notre Dame could play a 15th game in the national championship game against a team playing its 17th game.
Yeah, and it needs to be accounted for, and maybe that's just a penalty you give Notre Dame for not being in a conference. There's no perfect scenario because it's college football is so. At times, it's just there's different rules in different states, different rules in different conferences. You play different number of conference games, and you have some teams that aren't even in conferences. So I understand that you don't want to have a team like Notre Dame this year. All right, they've lost 1 game. They finished the season 11-1. Could they have been sitting at 5, and then everybody that's ranked 1 through 4 loses in a championship game? So then, what do you automatically bump Ohio or Notre Dame up to number 1? I get that argument. I mean, it's an extreme one, but I get where you've got to, you're talking apples and oranges when you're starting to put together a college football playoff.
I understand the college football playoff has to be adjusted. It's better, in my opinion, than what that undefeated Auburn team 20 years ago or last year, where there genuinely were 6 teams that had a right and had deserved to play for a title, in my opinion. I'd rather have more teams in than less. And because you have more teams, you have more parameters to work around. There's definitely things that need to be fixed. But, nothing guarantees anything. People were upset about how lopsided the first round games were. They were that way in the wild card round of the NFL, save Washington and Tampa Bay. And, hey, if they're seated differently, I saw a matchup. It would have been Oregon versus Indiana. or Indiana, or I forget who the ninth. I think it was Indiana or Boise State. Do we think the winner of Indiana Boise State would have given Oregon much of a game? Probably not. So I'm not going to complain about more football. I understand about wanting more good football. Totally get it. But to me, this is a positive step from a structure standpoint, with refinement definitely needed.
Yeah, and when we get to a couple of years down the road with NIL and everything that's going on, I do think, as we talked about earlier, the parity in college football with NIL and teams. Now you get two Big Ten champs 2 years in a row, where it was dominated by basically Alabama, Clemson, Georgia. Is it possible that some of those lower seeded matchups are going to be better games in 4 years than they were this year?
Yeah, it's, you need to let it play out. That's why I never have liked the conversation about drastically changing at least the number. I fear we're going to go to 14 by not this coming playoff, but the next, when the deal is up. Because again, more games, more dollars, all of that, and it'll probably build in the bye for the Big Ten and SEC champion. But we'll see. We'll see. Some Michigan topics. The first one, Sherrone Moore, Michigan's head coach, talked late last week at the Michigan High School Football Coaches Association. He took some questions from the media. To me, the most intriguing one, we shall see. When asked about Rod Moore's status at Michigan for 2025, quote, "It looks good, but we'll see," end quote. Don't want to get our hopes up, but man, Rod Moore and the Maize and Blue in 2025 would be quite helpful.
It sure as hell would. And you think, I know Wink has interviewed for some defensive coordinator jobs, hasn't gotten any. And who knows if he ultimately does or not. But with Derek Moore, Jayshon Barham, some of those guys that have made that decision, Rayshawn Benny to come back, that defense with Rod Moore on the back end could be special. And I guess the question is, because the deadline to declare for the draft passed, that was January 15. It's extended for those that play in the national championship game to the 24th. Is the risk of losing him to the transfer portal?
Not sure. And I think that was partially also injury-wise. We don't know how the injury had happened in spring ball last year, and ACLs are normally a year, but we're seeing more. Think about Jonathan Brooks, the Texas running back. He took more than a year to come back and then re-injured it, tore it again. So, yeah, I mean, Sherrone smartly being, not super detailed about it, but it looks good. I'm clinging to the looks good versus we'll see.
Right.
Call me biased.
Yeah. I think he'll be back in the Maize and Blue. I've got belief that he will be physically able to go, and I think he's going to be a huge difference maker for next year's football team.
Yeah. Now, along those lines, kind of want to talk with you about who are some guys you're looking at from an offseason standpoint to be leaders in winter conditioning, into spring ball, into the summer. Give me a handful of names of guys that you think can kind of set that tone, because, Michigan 23-24 lost not only important, a few important players, but a ton of depth. This year, it's about, hey, you're not losing as much, but boy, I mean, Michigan's probably going to have 4 first-round picks get their name called here in a few months.
Yeah, so you're losing some talent on defense to the NFL, but you're going to have some talent return, obviously, in regards to, I think, having Rayshawn Benny back. That's going to be huge in regards to leadership, stability up front. Some of the guys I just mentioned, Rod Moore, Derek Moore, Jayshon Barham, Ernest Hausman at linebacker. You're starting to talk about a front seven that could be pretty damn good. TJ Guy. Some of these guys returning, especially returning as upperclassmen, I think will be good. Zeke Berry is a guy that I know during the broadcast I could be a bit hard on him. Watching his growth throughout the course of the season, he's going to have to bring a guy like Jair Hill along. And I think he could be a leader in that, into talking to him and getting a sense of watching him work out. And I've got a lot of respect for what he did in the secondary in changing positions, taking on new tasks when Will Johnson wasn't available. But just his presence, I think there's a lot of guys in that locker room that really respect him as a player, as a person, as a competitor, and as a leader. So I look for him to be one of those guys as well. And then some of the young guys, Brandon Hillman, We saw him. I think he's going to be a guy because of his mentality, because of his, youthful exuberance, you might say, going into his second year at Michigan. I think he's a guy that could have a huge impact. The problem that we're going to run into is we're talking about a lot of these guys on the defensive side of the ball. The issue this year was offense. And at least in the backfield, you had some guys that were experienced, had championship mentality. Next year, Jordan Marshall, probably going to be one of those guys that they lean on for leadership. He's only going into his second year. And I do like what I heard from the coaches at the end of the year. And it was more than just one, not only his skill set, and we saw that in the bowl game, about his productivity, but it's also, just his mentality. He was compared to Blake Corum in terms of how he works, how he commands respect of those around him. Some guys just carry themselves that way. So I think that's going to be, part of it. What are they going to do with the quarterback position? Is it going to be Mikey Keene? Is it going to be Underwood? Is there going to be, are they going to start with Underwood? Is there going to be pressure to start? All those things could be true. But what type of leadership will you get from a freshman quarterback and play as well? The ups and downs that you're going to see from a freshman. There's been a lot of guys on the offensive line that have hit the transfer portal. Greg Crippen is going to have to stand up and be counted. Giovanni El-Hadi is going to have to show improvement and be a leader in the locker room, in the training room, in the weight room. Some of those guys are really going to have to step up and lead because they are upperclassmen. They were on some of those championship teams. And what does that equation look like for this team?
How does leadership play out at this time of the year when there aren't any games for months and months? What's needed from leaders?
It's the attitude that you go into the weight room with. And it doesn't have to be the weight room. It could be the training room as well. Rod Moore is obviously in both of them. And when you have an appointment with a trainer or a doctor, you show up on time. And you do all the little things. You do what you're asked to do, and you don't bitch and moan about it. Is it always fun to go in the weight room when you know it's going to hurt, you know it's going to be uncomfortable, and that uncomfortable feeling could last for more than just the hour or 2 hours that you're in the weight room. All of those sacrifices and how you do it, how you go about it, and the standard that you set also has to be upheld by everybody else. And those guys that are willing to set that standard at a championship level, that are willing to go in the weight room. When you hear comments like we heard a couple of years ago from Ben Herbert when he was talking about Aiden Hutchinson, hey, wring it out of me every single ounce so that I'm ready on Saturdays in the fall. I'm ready when the draft comes around. That's the mentality that you have to come with. And it's showing up every day. It's doing things right. It's setting a standard, and it's not perfection. No one's going to be perfect, but you can't be perfect on time. You can be perfect in always giving the best effort. If all you've got today is you feel like you're at 70%, then give that 70%. And then tomorrow when you're 100%, or if you feel even better, then that's what you give, but you give it all every single day. That's what it takes in terms of leadership at this time of year.
Top 25 way too early rankings are starting to come out. It seems like, and I read a few of them. I'm sure I haven't read all of them, but you're curious, right? Want to know where, as fans, as commentators, where Michigan stands. Feels like Michigan's kind of in that just outside, maybe just barely in the top 10, down to 20, maybe a few spots below in all of them. But I would venture to say that more people think Michigan is on the outside looking in the playoff conversation going into 25 than people think they are on the inside of that 12-team playoff. What have you seen? What say you on the matter?
I think that's very logical. What did we see in the bowl game? We saw a defense that went out there, and I mentioned all those guys that are going to be back. And you've got some experience, you've got some talent, you're going to have consistency in the coaching staff if Wink's back. And I think that the defense played better in the final 3 weeks of the season, and certainly the bowl game, than they did at the beginning of the year. It's really going to come down to the development of the offense. If Bryce Underwood is the real deal and he comes in and he lights things on, or if it's Mikey Keene and he comes in here and he could be one of those transfer quarterbacks, That's probably the biggest question for this Michigan offense. And then everything trickles down from there. What are you going to do with the offensive line? Does, do the young tackles develop enough to be an offensive line that can run the ball and dictate the tempo of games? Can they control the line of scrimmage? What type of consistent play you're getting from the running backs? And I know that they've tried to revamp the wide receiver room. You got some guys in there with a little bit more size, maybe a little bit more speed, but what does that look like in this offense? And ultimately, what is Chip Lindsey? How does he call a game? I think there's a lot of questions, and rightfully so. It doesn't mean they have to have all the answers right now, but you better be working towards those answers.
Normally, when a former player gets drafted in the NFL and they shine on the divisional round of the playoffs from the University of Michigan, we'd be talking about them. It might have happened a lot sooner than this on the podcast. But Mikey Sainristil, there are plenty of people who are listening to this who are, very proud and should be. I mean, Mikey, gosh, he might be the second best draft pick for a team ever. As a rookie. I mean, you want to talk about nailing it by the Washington Commanders, but certainly awkward, right? Seeing the tweets from Michigan and Lions fans on Saturday night, it had the feel of a tragedy, of a rug pull with those two interceptions. You and Jim Costa have done great work on it on 97.1 over the last couple days, and I know that conversation will unfortunately carry that show for quite a while. But here's your opportunity to at least sprinkle a little love on Mikey while also saying, what the heck, dude?
Not surprised at all. And, when guys go to the league, no matter what school they come from, it changes how you view them. It doesn't take away the love that you had for them here at Michigan, but when they're playing against your team in the NFL, or if they're playing for your team, right? You got Buckeyes. I had Buckeye teammates. And it just, those loyalties go by the wayside. But in regards to Washington, and they may have completely revamped their team with 2 picks. And that is obviously Jaden Daniels on offense. It's always going to start with the quarterback. He's been unbelievably impressive. And it feels like, from the outside looking in, that he's got all the leadership traits that you want from the franchise, and that's the quarterback. He's played well. He's done everything that they've asked of him, and he's gone out there and won games. And then on defense, in the second round, you take a guy like Mikey Sainristil, you see how productive he can be on the field, and he's only going to get better. And I watched him throughout the course of the year. He is going to be a guy that they lean on in that secondary, whether it's going to be a shutdown corner or it's going to be a nickel. They're going to use him very much like they did at Michigan, but it's the leadership that he brings on that side of the ball. And I can't stress this enough. I've probably said it enough times where people maybe they're tired of hearing it. You can get certain things from coaches, and coaches certainly put together a game plan. They build the teams. It's the general manager as well, but ultimately it's the players that go out and play. It's those guys that are going to make the sacrifice throughout the course of a year to determine the trajectory of your team. And if you have a leader on offense like a Jaden Daniels and a leader on defense like a Mikey Sainristil, I mean, he was a 2-time captain here. I think you may have just remade your entire franchise in one draft.
If you discard all of the non-obvious decisions like, hey, go recruit J.J. McCarthy and Blake Corum, right? You take out all that. The decision to move Mikey from offense to defense, I mean, it's one of the biggest, most important decisions in Michigan football history.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you could talk a lot about different guys that have made that. There's none that people are going to be able to pull out more than Mikey Sainristil. This is literally, he just finished his 3rd year as a defensive back. And we saw what he did in the NFL. We saw what he did in 2 years at Michigan. It may be the greatest position change in the history of Michigan football.
Who you got on Sunday in the conference championship games?
Oh, they're still playing football? Let's see. Who's playing?
The game that our commentator or our commenter earlier was referring to was actually the Pistons winning in Houston. It was a good win. Big win. Cade's playing well.
Good win, yes. I think Buffalo in the AFC. I know they're going to have to go to Arrowhead, and Buffalo and Kansas City in the regular season has been a completely different story than Buffalo and Kansas City in the postseason. I just feel like this is Josh Allen's year to get it done. I think they end up winning in Arrowhead. He just right now is I don't want to say unstoppable, but it feels like he's about as close as you could get when he's at the prime of his career and being able to run. That's going to change over the course of time. He's not always going to be the same runner he is now, but his ability to identify defenses, when you watch him pre-snap, post-snap, he just has such a command of the offense and just never really seems to be fooled. I think Buffalo comes out of the AFC, and in terms of the NFC, I just feel like the Eagles – defense. I know they've had some tough injuries defensively, but that offensive line, Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, paired with one of the best defenses this year in the NFL, I think they're just too much for the Commanders. So I think the Super Bowl is going to end up being Philly and Buffalo.
We differ on both.
Oh, really?
Yes. I think Jalen Hurts is really banged up. And I was listening to a podcast and someone's like, does Jaden Daniels sweat?
Yeah, I don't think he does.
I don't think he does. It's crazy, but I think the Commanders, they're going to have to find a way to slow down Saquon. But Saquon went off and the Rams still had a chance to win that game. So give me the Commanders, and I am least confident that the Kansas City Chiefs of the 4 teams remaining can score 30 points. But I am most confident that they will not make the losing plays. They will find a way. I will believe Kansas City loses when I see it. It doesn't make sense. I can't explain it, but they just win by not losing. Does that make sense?
Oh, sure.
I mean, not losing play to play. I know it's easy, but yeah, of course they win by not losing. I'm saying they win by their expected value of plays are so rarely in the red.
Yeah, they don't do anything to beat themselves. And it really depends on which Buffalo team shows up. And I know a lot of it hinges on Josh Allen. If the Josh Allen that I saw at Ford Field is the Josh Allen that shows up in Arrowhead, and I 100% believe it will, I don't know that defense can slow him down. And the strength of that defense, or that team in Kansas City right now, is their defense. In regards to Philly, I think, yeah, Jalen Hurts might be a little bit banged up, but the Lions were able to run the ball, and God knows why they got away from running it. I still can't figure that one out. That's a coaching mishap. But with Saquon Barkley, that offensive line did not play well against the Rams. They gave up 7 sacks. It's very uncharacteristic of that offensive line. I think they protect him better. And I think that I just don't see Washington being able. They couldn't stop Jahmyr Gibbs. I don't think they're going to be able to stop Saquon Barkley. And ultimately, Philly is the team that they're just built to win that game.
Going to be fascinating. We got one great question. We're more than an hour in. Thanks to all those. We've got almost 700 viewers right now between John's X platform and the YouTube. So we're going to be, won't be every Tuesday. And obviously the audio, if you're listening on the In the Trenches and the MGO Blue podcast audio feed, we'll have that up every Wednesday morning. We'll have some audio only things. We'll have some guests. John's working on some alumni. We'll have some current program folks, but just wanted to let fans know it'll be 11:15. We did 10:30 a.m. during the regular season, looking at most Tuesdays, 11:15 a.m. for the streams. But they want to get to this great question from Keegan. We could go a while on this, but I know we're a little bit over our normal time here. Would Michigan have been more ready in the first playoff run if they would have started the season with JJ? If so, why would we not start Underwood game 1 next year? I'll let you take that one first, John, because I think there's multiple layers here.
Well, I think with Cade, you had a guy that had some experience going into that season, and it's hard to argue Cade because they won the Big Ten first time in however many years, 17 years, whatever it was, and they beat Ohio State. They did not play well, obviously, against Georgia. Georgia had an epic defense that year. When you think about all the guys, and heck, you're looking at Philly. We just talked about Philly. Jalen Carter, Jordan, all those guys were a part of that Georgia defense. This year, I know Mikey Keene is coming in, but I don't see him really having the same impact or carrying the same weight as Cade did going into that season. And certainly JJ came in with a lot of hype and a lot of fanfare. Nothing like Underwood is coming in with. So I think some of the dynamics are a little bit different. The decision makers are going to be different as well.
The hype of Bryce Underwood is higher because of how well JJ McCarthy lived up to expectations. And that is, now I understand Bryce is a higher ranked recruit. I'm not saying had JJ not become what he became, Bryce would still have more hype coming in, but it adds to it because not all 5 stars, number 1 prospects work out as flawlessly as JJ McCarthy did. The other thing I'll say is, I think we kind of saw what Michigan believed the difference of Cade and JJ was in that matchup against Georgia. Michigan needed the fluidity, the calmness, the veteran nature of Cade McNamara to get to the playoff. And then it realized that it needed somebody with a higher ceiling to win in the playoff.
Yeah. And ultimately, that even took 2 years to get to it. And so when they did go with JJ in year 2, one of the most painful losses is the loss to TCU. And it did happen. And JJ was the starting quarterback for that entire year, save 1 game.
Yeah. I'm just going to say this. We're not going to answer it now because I have a 1 o'clock. But Corey asked, who do y'all think should start in the O-line? We don't have 30 minutes for John to talk about that right now, but we will save that conversation. Corey, come on back next week. Maybe we'll do some depth chart discussion because
TBD,
all I know is if we're what's that?
I said TBD. I got to find out who's still on the roster.
All I know is if I'm making the rundown and I'm like, man, we need a little girth on this 7 from 77. I don't feel like the podcast is long enough. Just say, hey, John, offensive line. What are your thoughts?
Right. Yes. And then and then you could drop off, and we'll see you in about a half an hour.
All right, that's our second and certainly our smoothest of the off-season podcast so far. Great stuff from John. Great stuff from those who were watching. Excited to keep these streams going. We'll have interactions with fans. Love to have you join us on Tuesdays at 11:15. Also excited about a few basketball YouTube streams. We're not quite ready to announce yet, but they're coming, and we're excited to do that here soon as well. But that's it. John, take us home.
Hey, thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next week on In the Trenches.